Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We have our weekend edition, and if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. And Penna Dexter in studio with us. Dr. Merrill Matthews back with us again with the Institute for Policy Innovation. We've posted one of his articles, which we'll get to in just a few minutes. Today, April 20th, is National School Walkout Day, and there have been a lot of different high schools around the state of Texas and even in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex that said, it may be a walkout day, but we're not letting our students walk out. So we'll see where that plays itself out. We'll get to that in just a minute. But, Penna, one of the things we mentioned briefly yesterday, and I'd like to get into it a little bit more, is we have the potential of having the Senate Foreign Relations Committee not favorably reporting out a nominee for the Secretary of State. That is unprecedented, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. It would be probably Mike Pompeo, who's the Trump nominee for Secretary of State, would probably be voted on by the full Senate. And now it's looking like there's a couple Democrats that would support him, so he would get confirmed. But not to be voted, that would have to bypass, a negative vote by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And it just, to me, goes to show how political things have gotten. It's really Trump hatred that's causing it to happen, because he is stellar. I mean, he was a congressman from Kansas, but before that, he was at West Point and then a Harvard Law graduate. He was first in his class at West Point, I should say, and then editor of the Harvard Law Review. He's been CIA director, and a lot of Democrats, even people on the Foreign Relations Committee, supported him and confirmed him for that, a year plus ago. So for this to happen now, that it's political. And I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the progress that President Bush seems to be making on North Korea. We can talk about that later.
Yeah, President Trump, yes, certainly.
President Trump. I'm thinking about Barbara Bush today.
Yes, well, we need to talk about Barbara Bush. We'll get to that in just a minute. Dr. Merrill Matthews, your comments.
Well, I agree with that. Typically, when the president nominated someone, especially Secretary of State, assuming they were generally qualified, so Hillary Clinton got through very easily. John Kerry got through, I think, almost unanimously.
Unanimously in the committee. And
right.
I think only had 3 negative votes in the entire Senate. Yeah.
And there was a general sense of the Republicans didn't agree with everything that Hillary Clinton was going to do or John Kerry wanted to do, but they were obviously qualified, smart people, and so forth. And so you typically gave the president the person that the president wanted in those positions. But it is completely politicized now. And from the Democratic side, if they don't stand up against someone like Mike Pompeo, the Democrats have moved so far to the left now that they get primaried or they get pilloried for not taking a vote against something that was normally just a pro forma vote.
Dianne Feinstein last time voted for Mike Pompeo as CIA director, but this time she has a primary challenge from the left, so maybe that is something. Tim Kaine voted for him last time, but he challenged it. And again, to put this in perspective for just a minute, I got a couple of the votes. George W. Bush, since we mentioned Bush a minute ago, Colin Powell was confirmed by a unanimous vote. Condoleezza Rice, 85-13. But then, again, to make the point, most of the time, Republicans are really good about saying, look, if this is your person, we'll take them. Hillary Clinton received 2 negative votes. John Kerry received 3. And as we mentioned a minute ago, John Kerry was passed unanimously out of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. This would be the first time since 2025, which is the first time they actually then took it out of closed session, that you have not had a favorable passing out of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee of a nominee. So, again, it shows you how politicized everything's become.
Mark Thiessen wrote in his column today in the Washington Post, he pointed out some of the others. For instance, Madeleine Albright, who was pretty, out there to the left. She was unanimously approved with the strong support of Jesse Helms, who's so conservative. And then Warren Christopher and Cyrus Vance, who are Democrats, also unanimously approved in committee. Colin Powell, James Baker, and George Shultz also. In fact, says Mark Thiessen, no Secretary of State going all the way back to Henry Kissinger had ever received more than 2 negative votes in the Foreign Relations Committee until Donald Trump became president.
Again, we might remind our listeners, and Dr. Merrill Matthews, let's talk about this for just a minute. The framers intended that there would be advice and consent, but you can go back and look at the Federalist Papers, and when I was at Georgetown, I was forced to read them all, so, I can at least say that with some kind of authority, that it's pretty obvious that they wanted to make sure that there wouldn't be too much nepotism or patronage, that sometimes people that were completely unqualified, then the Senate would reject them. But if you had a qualified individual, the assumption up until fairly recently has been, well, then we'll just pass them through. That's changed dramatically, hasn't it?
It has changed dramatically. And, of course, Harry Reid removed the filibuster for a lot of these nominations. Otherwise, we'd be seeing filibusters on this. But the Senate was meant to have a supermajority for some things. For instance, impeachment and that type of thing. But it was not until later that they actually started saying, well, we're going to have a supermajority in some other areas. Aaron Burr brought that in. Woodrow Wilson decided to try to scale that back because he was having some trouble getting funding for the war that he needed. So they scaled it back. But in 1974-75, they changed this and created what they called the virtual filibuster,
yes.
Which allowed them to just, I would call it the lazy man's filibuster, because they don't actually have to stand up in the Senate and oppose something for a while. And so that's taken us to this position now where they've had to change the rules again, and they're doing something to try to stop the president's agenda.
And, of course, when they're arguing about it, it's because of his positions on various things. For instance, Tim Kaine, who was the vice presidential nominee with Hillary Clinton, he's on the Foreign Relations Committee, and he says he's opposing him because he agrees with President Trump's positions on foreign policy, like the Iran deal. President Trump is, he wants to unwind it. And, Tim Kaine says, well, that's not diplomacy. That's not practicing diplomacy to unwind the Iran deal. But presidents should get cabinet members who agree with their positions. I mean, when did that become controversial? That is not controversial. So it should be a vote on whether this person has the temperament and is qualified. But to take their positions on issues is ridiculous, because if he was voted down, then President Trump would find someone else who agreed with him. So it's silly to vote on those issues, but that's the way they play to their constituencies out there.
Or maybe he just become the Secretary of State. The Wall Street Journal loved this line: who needs a Secretary of State? But again, back to Tim Kaine. Tim Kaine says, I don't want a Secretary of State who's going to exacerbate President Trump's tendency towards opposing diplomacy. And he said, more importantly, this was one of his concerns about his nuclear deal with Tehran. And I love what the editors of the Wall Street Journal said. Mr. Kaine might recall that Donald Trump campaigned and won while opposing the Iran nuclear deal. And if Mr. Kaine is still sore about the outcome, he should have told his running mate, that would be Hillary Clinton, to campaign in Wisconsin. So there's some answers to that, right?
Well, Rex Tillerson, who's a great corporate leader, was probably the least qualified person that we've had to be Secretary of State. Mike Pompeo may be the most qualified person. Rex Tillerson was able to get through. It's not clear Mike Pompeo will.
Yeah, it's just amazing. Well, we're going to take a break, and we come back. Of course, we want to focus on the schools a little bit. Very good piece by our own Dr. Merrill Matthews on teachers' salaries, administration. Of course, we also have that student walkout. Love to get your comments. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Dr. Ann Bradley has been on my radio program and in a recent article talks about her first trip to the Soviet Union. Even as a teenager, she could see through the attempt to make Russia look more prosperous than it was. In fact, her visit was one of the reasons she became an economist. She ends her article by telling the true story of what happened when Boris Yeltsin visited the United States. He was newly elected to the Soviet Parliament and the Supreme Soviet. After he visited the Johnson Space Center, he made an unscheduled stop at Randall's grocery store in Houston. The trip to this simple grocery store changed him forever. Yeltsin roamed the aisles to see a number of products available to every customer. They were offering free cheese samples. He was overwhelmed. He could not believe the bounty before him. Even members of the elite Politburo did not have the choices available to every person who walked into the store. A reporter captured his comments in an article in the Houston Chronicle. He said, "When I saw those shelves crammed with hundreds, thousands of cans, cartons, and goods of every possible sort, for the first time I felt quite frankly sick with despair for the Soviet people." He went on to say that such a potentially super-rich country as ours had been brought to such a state of poverty. It is terrible to think of it. What a statement from a man who was powerful and well-connected politically. He may have had great political power in Russia, but he was powerless to provide it to the Russian people, what was typical for all Americans. The communist government failed to provide the basic necessities for their people, and this is what happens in a centrally controlled economy. This is a lesson we need to pass on to our children and grandchildren. The abundance of goods on the shelves of the Houston grocery store weren't provided by the government. They were provided by a free market. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Hi, everybody. This is Gary Bauer with American Values in Washington, D.C. You know, I've been involved in big battles in Washington for many, many years. And in those battles, time and time again, it's been Point of View Radio and Kerby Anderson who's provided me with a platform to sound the alarm. Kerby Anderson and Point of View have always been there standing strong. That's why today I'm asking you to join me in giving the most generous contribution you can to Point of View Radio. You know, Point of View and Kerby don't get big subsidies from Washington, D.C. like some liberals do. They depend on generous donors like you who believe in family, faith, and freedom.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Kind comments from Gary Bauer, has been on the program with us and was with us last week. Let's, if we can, talk about school for just a minute. I want to get into the issue of school salaries and teacher salaries and the rest, but I just might mention today that it is the National School Walkout, and this is, again, an attempt to try to have the next wave of gun control activism. So if any of you'd like to join us, I would love to hear if your students went to school and walked out, or whether they went to school and stayed in the classroom. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. But one of the articles that we passed around earlier in the week, Penna, was this article by Dr. Merrill Matthews, Raise Teachers' Salaries by Draining the Public School Administrators' Swamp. Didn't you love the article?
I did, and the other news peg for this is that in various places, like in Oklahoma, there are teacher strikes going on, asking for higher pay. And, you know, sometimes it's when you look at the length of time since teachers have had a raise in some of these places, they do deserve higher pay. They definitely, have a point here. And so Dr. Matthews wrote this great piece, because this is something that's always bothered me, Buddy, is the idea that we pay exorbitant salaries and have numerous school administrators and, with titles that you're not even sure what they do or whether they're needed. And yet the teachers are, they're doing the work, and the students are the ones suffering, aren't they?
They are. And one of the things, when you have these debates, and I've been listening to the news coverage of this, I never hear anybody saying in this, well, we need to raise teachers' salaries, but we're spending a lot of money on education, and most of it's going to the administrative element of it. So I went and looked, and Benjamin Scafidi, with the Milton Friedman Institute, the Friedman Institute on Education, published a study a few years ago. He came back and just recently did an update on that, where he said, well, let's just see how many administrators we have out there. And what he found from 1950 to 2015, the ratio of school administrators, not teachers, but school administrators to students has increased by 700%. So we've got 7 times more administrators than students as a ratio than we did back in 1950. Now, I try to give a nod. You've got the federal government involved in this. There's grants. There's other filings and so forth. So you could see that there would be some increase. But 700%, and I would bet if you looked at the salaries, you would see the same thing for the salaries. I just actually went looking the other day. The head of the Waco ISD makes, was it $340,000 a year, something like that? Irving is way up there. Several of these administrators of smaller independent school districts, not tiny but smaller, are well into the 6 figures, high 200s, low $300,000. And you sit there and think, it's amazing how much money we push to the administration and don't give it to the teachers.
Well, let's, if we can, use a statistic, since our listeners are listening primarily in Texas, although we do have some listening online from other states, because I see them making comments. By the way, if you want to make a comment on Facebook page or even give us a call, we'd love to hear from you. But one of those arguments, Penna, you have right there. What has the Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick stated about how much of these dollars actually go to the classroom and the teachers?
Well, I'm glad Dan Patrick's on this, but he says that only 32% of the state's public school funding actually goes to teachers. And, when you consider that they're the ones that directly interface with your kids, they're the ones that are make or break, really, the educational system,
right,
not the administrators. So, you have to have a good superintendent and a good principal and all that, but really looking at the roster of people, not only on the school campuses, sometimes there are a lot of administrators even on the school campus, but in that administration building, and those buildings are getting bigger and more expensive. It's just, it's something that really needs to shift back and be reformed.
Administrator Hinojosa is head of the Dallas Independent School District now, but before him, they had a person they brought in, I believe, from California, and he brought in several people and gave them high 6-figure salaries, and it was so over the top that even the DISD's board's eyebrows began to raise over, do we really need to be bringing in all these people with these very high salaries? In some cases, I think he doubled or tripled some of the salaries of people he brought in to do this. One had been convicted, I think, of some crime someplace else. He ended up having to let him go.
Yep.
Didn't do the due diligence of looking on the background there. But you just look at this and you say, look where all this money is going. And it's not just that, it's the pensions also, because the administrators tend to have higher salaries. There's secretaries and so forth who don't, but there's administrators who have much higher salaries. They get higher retirement, so it affects all the pensions in there, and that's another major cost in it.
So we have posted Dr. Matthews' article on this, Raise Teacher Salaries by Draining the Public School Administrator Swamp, at pointofview.net. One other point, a PolitiFact, I guess, took Dan Patrick, our Lieutenant Governor's statement, and they looked into it. And they said, yeah, there are about 347,000 public school teachers in Texas and about 69,000 teacher support staff. Wow.
And
another 237,000 people who fall broadly into the administrative staff category. So it's almost the same.
When you put them
add those together.
we've got almost one administrator to one teacher in Texas.
There you go.
So there's a sort of joke we use with Social Security, but you could see a administrator coming to work with an dressed in black. Well, what happened? Well, my teacher died today.
Teacher died today. It's pretty bad. It's the old Social Security joke. Let me just mention that this connects up with some of the conversation we had just the other day, because we had Angela Paxton in here, we had Candy Noble, and we had Lisa Luby Ryan. And certainly with Angela and Candy, they are former teachers, and they were agreeing with the same thing. Because let's talk about what it's like for some of these teachers. And again, you don't even have to go out of the state of Texas to find that. Some of these teachers not only aren't getting paid the kind of salaries of the administrators, but they're having to take their own money out to buy school supplies and to do all sorts of other things. Mm-hmm. So when you have that situation, it's almost like we're spending all the money on military hardware, but not on the troops. Right. It's got that same kind of mindset that says, well, okay, it's great to have all the firepower for the military, but you better pay for the individuals that are going to have to use that. Same thing. You can spend some money at administrators, but you better spend it on those that are actually in the classroom doing the teaching, right?
Yes, and it seems to me that an option for a state would be to come up to say, we're spending this much money on public education. We're going to require that the districts put 40% or 50%. You said 32%. We're going to require that they spend 50% of that on teachers. We'll let you figure out what you do with the administrative staff, but we're going to require a certain percentage of that goes to the teachers.
I have always thought that teachers should be paid a lot, and they should be paid. Of course, we have all kinds of unions and other things that kind of control this, but they should be paid based on their merit, how good they are, and they should just, and their continued employment should also be based on their merit. So we should have really good teachers because they're training our next generation. And if we have really good teachers and pay them well, I think you could probably jettison the need for some of these administrators and even, the extra help that's in there. So, other countries elevate their teachers, I think, a little bit more than we do in America. And I think we need to look at that.
Kirby, we had some of our two daughters were in private church-related schools for a while. And my recollection is there's maybe one or two administrators for the whole school. It just wasn't very big.
I remember the Bill Bennett interview we did years ago when he was Secretary of Education. He said when he went to the New York public school system, he saw this huge mass of administrators. And then he went to the Catholic parochial schools. Mm-hmm. And he's saying, well, now who administrates that? And well, Mother Mary and Mother Sue. And in one hand, they talked about the entire parochial system.
And they were probably teaching too.
Yeah, and they might have been teaching too. And he said, what's wrong with this picture here? And of course, we know exactly what that is. We need to take a break. We've got a lot more to cover. And by the way, I'd love to get your comments about education. Are we spending too much on education? Are we spending too much on administrative salaries? Love to get your comments. You can call 800-351-1212. Also, we'll let you leave a message on our Facebook Live post, and I'll read some of those as well. And if you'd like to find that article, as Penna Dexter mentioned, it's on our website, pointofview.net.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to, of course, watch online, you can do so. Listen online, you can do that as well. Of course, we're at the local radio station here in Dallas, but we also are broadcasting on the YouTube live channel, and you can leave a comment if you'd like to do so. In studio with us today, Penna Dexter, Buddy Matthews. I know Kelly Shackelford is out today, but we'll get a chance to see him soon. This has been one of those interesting months where Debbie Georgiadis is out the entire month of April. Kelly Shackelford is out the entire month of April. So, Penna, I'm glad you're here. And I'm glad
I'm here, too.
Merrill Matthews here. So
it's fun.
that I'm not talking to myself, which happens entirely too often. But Dr. Merrill Matthews, this piece is available at ipi.org. But first of all, we've also got it on our website, pointofview.net. And I really encourage you, if you're interested in education, it not only has a lot of the facts and figures, but it has these graphs, these charts, and things like that. And so this is the kind of work you do at the Institute for Policy Innovation, isn't it?
Right. We've been around for a little over 30 years now, about 30 years, and just a nonprofit research institute, commonly called a think tank, and we publish on a range of different public policy issues.
One of the things that is the reason why we see these salaries bloating is you really don't have any market forces.
Right.
Something we've talked about on two different occasions here just in the last couple of weeks, because when you're a monopoly, there's no need to downsize. And yet sometimes you have corporations where they get a little bit big, a little bit bloated. They have too many of their buddies as vice presidents of that. But sooner or later, there are market forces that cause them to say, we need to send a few of these people somewhere else, right?
Right. You have corporations, especially large ones, occasionally, especially in an economic downturn, you'll see an announcement saying we're going to cut 3,000, 5,000 people from our staff. And I said, well, what were those? Who's doing their work? When was the last time you heard the federal government saying we're going to cut something like that? But anyway, that happens every now and then. And the interesting thing is when corporations do that, they do that in a way to try to have the least impact on the customer.
Right.
Whereas when governments do that, especially education systems or city councils or so forth, they do it in a way that they try to have the greatest impact on the customer. So if the Dallas City Council says, okay, we've got some revenue problems we need to cut, they don't say we're going to try to cut this program over here that doesn't affect many people. They say we're going to go after the libraries. We're going to have to close the pools. And that's intended to get taxpayer outrage up, saying, okay, well, just charge us a little more in taxes, tax us a little more, and then keep these things open. They never really do go to the cuts.
Well, Penna, that shows us a little bit more about the strategy, doesn't it?
Well, that's just government for you. It will always grow unless you come in with, I don't know, a vacuum cleaner or something, clean out the swamp.
Well,
which is what we're calling for here.
Yeah, again, the administrative swamp. And again, I think some people would not complain if education was doing really well. But let's, for just a minute, talk about something that Lindsey Burke put together. First of all, when President Lyndon Johnson, let's go back that far, signed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act into the law in 1965, he vowed unprecedented new federal invention in K-12 education, bridge the gap between helplessness and hope. Okay, then you go to President Jimmy Carter signed the Department of Education Organization Act into law, creating the Department of Education, saying the time has passed when the federal government can afford to give second-level part-time attention to its responsibilities in American education. Let's fast forward to President George W. Bush, who then actually made the case for No Child Left Behind, saying that we wanted to end the soft bigotry of low expectations. And then more recently, President Barack Obama signed into law the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which sent an unprecedented $98 billion to the Department of Education, represented the largest investment in education in our nation's history. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of history. How are we doing? Well, it turns out that they just more recently did the national assessment. And basically, I will summarize it by saying this. Student achievements were flat. You didn't see any increase. And in a few places, you actually see it worse because there's been a gap between, for example, white students and non-white students. That has remained unchanged. And in some areas, the National Assessment of Educational Progress actually has declined. This is the first time that math and reading scores have declined or remained stagnant since the test was first administered in 1990. So if we were getting a big bang for our bucks, maybe we'd say, okay, we are spending more money than ever before, and we don't have much to show for it.
When you look at the per student expenditures in some of these areas of the country, it's absolutely unbelievable. You wonder what you're getting. And I think, you mentioned the creation of the Department of Education, and what's happened with the federal bureaucracy for education is it mostly focuses on low income, low achieving areas and spending all this money making decrees from on high from the federal government that don't help higher or mediocre achieving students. They're really targeted at the low achiever, and that pulls the entire system down. And it also expands the role of education. So education is doing many more things than just reading, writing, arithmetic. I mean, feeding people is one of the things, and that's, again, is the focus on the low income. Providing breakfast, providing lunch, even some places providing dinner, daycare, and all of that. And so that, I've heard that there's been some rethinking under Betsy DeVos with regard to that. And that would be a whole show, I think, to get some experts on. But that's been part of the problem with education. It's taken on mandates that are not needed, but they are things that the left loves, because they tend to cause the federal government to be able to control things that are supposed to be, and always since the beginning of our country have been controlled by local and state local, county, and state officials.
And I think I would add, it sounds harsh, but the elected officials who see there's a benefit to elected officials having bad schools in their area, because they say, elect me and I will get more money to this area. And it makes a kind of dependency of if things aren't going well, then you need your member there to be able to address that. And if they were able to actually fix education, what would some of these people complain about?
Yeah. Well, again, and this is the national assessment, but they've also done some international assessments. And what they found is when, for example, I'll just use the math scores of those countries where the students did the best were almost always Asian schools and South Korea and Japan. And you say, well, how did the United States do? Well, it was much further down the list. There was only one area where American students were better than any other students, and that was in self-esteem.
Yeah.
They did poorly on the test, but they felt really good about how they did on the test.
Well, I know, because we've had actual curricula and classes in self-esteem. And self-esteem should really come from how good you are, how well you do. But instead, there's all kinds of psychological ways that they try to use on kids to just help them see that they're great.
Well, again, we're trying to make everybody laugh a little bit, but it is really sad.
But it's real. It's true, and it's bad.
It is so
bad
sad
news.
And a sad commentary, and your tax dollars are going for those. Just before I take a break, I wanted to get your comments around the roundtable. This national school walkout at a time when we already, I think, have demonstrated that students aren't doing that well. It seems like every time I turn around, Penna Dexter, we seem a few more high school students having one more reason to walk out of class, whether it's Earth Day, whether it's gun control activism. Now, there was a pro-life group that tried to walk out, and they didn't get any help at all from the schools. But it seems to me that if we want students to be active, why can't we tell them to do it after class?
Yeah, do it after school. Let's have, something positive, a project or a parade or something else. But to walk out of school every time you're not happy with something or you want to promote one of your leftist causes.
But what they are learning is how you get media attention.
Yes.
And you don't get as much media attention if you say, we're going to wait till after school and do something on our own time. We get media attention when we step out. So they're learning how to pull the strings to be able to try to get the biggest impact, and the media feed off of it.
Yeah.
And, of course, it's not the students that are organizing these things.
Yeah, well, we also understand that as well. Again, 2,600 walkouts planned across the country today, and many of them are encouraged to leave their classrooms at 10 a.m., so most of that has taken place. You might say, why today? Well, this is the anniversary of the Columbine High School shooting, and I think if you really wanted to do something about these shootings, why don't you go back to the work of Daryl Scott, whose daughter Rachel Scott was the first individual shot. by those two individuals. And Rachel's Challenge has been an outstanding success around the country. And I had a chance to go to one of their events even last week to learn just some of these incredible stories about that. So if indeed we want to do something about school shootings, maybe we should think about the shooter, not about the gun, and do what we can to prevent bullying and to integrate all the students and to actually promote kindness and all the other things that Rachel's Challenge is all about. So let's take a break. We've got a lot more to cover. And again, we have many of these articles posted on the website. The one we've been talking about so far, teachers' salaries, is one that is available on our website. But of course, you can also find it at IPI.org, which stands for the Institute for Policy Innovation, which is the organization that Dr. Merrill Matthews works with. We'll take a break. Be back with more right after this.
With unemployment at a low 4.1%, businesses are complaining that they can't find enough workers. The Wall Street Journal says the shortage is due in part to government benefits that corrode a culture of work. Consider SNAP, the nation's food stamp program. More than 40 million Americans are in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. That's up from 17 million in 2000. Since then, the benefits and total cost of the program have exploded. Between 2000 and 2008, food stamp spending doubled. Due to the 2008 recession, the Obama administration allowed states to waive the work requirements that existed for SNAP participants. More than after previous recessions, food stamp recipients have stayed in the program, and SNAP spending has now nearly doubled again. SNAP benefits should be reserved for poor people, but the program has long operated under a policy of broad-based categorical eligibility. In 30 states, that means a low-income person with plenty of net worth is still eligible. A person who draws on or even receives information about government assistance can get food stamps. The Farm Bill, introduced in the House of Representatives, features a requirement that able-bodied Americans ages 18 through 59 and receiving food stamps work at least 20 hours per week. There are exemptions for the disabled and anyone who is pregnant or caring for a child under 6. About a third of current participants will be subject to the new rules. This should save taxpayers around $90 billion over the next 10 years. According to the Journal, those who stop receiving benefits because of a work requirement will fall into two categories. Either they refuse to work or train for work, or they found a job. Polls show that nearly 90% of the public agrees that able-bodied adults should be required to work or prepare for work as a requirement for receiving assistance. Our system should reflect such wisdom. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
I am just so thankful for you, Kerby, and for you continuing in this ministry, and for people whom God has lifted up in these last days. I just want to thank you and just ask that God would bless you.
I appreciate Point of View. You've been great and wonderful. A lot of information, and I really appreciate all your work you do.
I just wanted to call in and express my gratitude for the awesome work that you guys have done. I've been listening for about 6 months now, and it's just been something I can hardly miss. Thank you for giving me my daily dose of truth with a biblical worldview. I'd just like to encourage anyone listening that's inspired by Point of View to give what they can. I'm a California millennial and Christian, and I now can say I support Point of View.
I've been listening to Point of View regularly for the past year and a half, and I have to say it's been my favorite radio program. Thank you, Kerby, for continuing Marlon's legacy and carrying the torch of Point of View.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
In studio, Penna Dexter, Buddy Matthews, and let's, if we can, since we just heard from a California millennial a minute ago, talk about California. This is a piece we talked about briefly earlier in the week, but I'd love to get your comments, both Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews, that California progressives launch another attack on free speech. It's by David French, and it's a piece of legislation that's just making its way through the legislature. It may not actually get passed, but right at the moment, the Assembly Bill 2943 has passed two committees, 8-2 and 8-1. So it's on a fast track to possibly become law. We'll see. But it would make it unlawful business practice to engage in a transaction intended to result or that results in the sale or lease of goods or services to any consumer that, and here's the point, engaged in sexual orientation change efforts. So it could be a book that suggests that you could actually change your sexual orientation. It could be a service, which would be like counseling, even biblical counseling, that could suggest that you could change your sexual orientation. And this is the closest thing I've seen in some time to ban the sale of books. Penna Dexter, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, you know, it's almost, according to the left, it's one of the worst sins you commit to try to tell a person who is either struggling with their sexual orientation or with their gender identity that there's a way out, that, you know, the Lord can help you. He cares about this. This is not biblical behavior that you're engaging in or that you're tempted to engage in. Some people would like to get help. In California, they've gone to great lengths to make it illegal, and now they're doing this book banning bill. And the bill not only bans books, counseling services, church conferences, academic courses. Think about Christian colleges who are teaching kids the biblical view of sexual activity and all of that. All of this is under the spirit of this bill, and we'd have to see how it actually played out. But this is an effort, again, by the left it's an assault on people of faith. It's a way to criminalize biblical truth. And, you know, you've got these people in the Assembly of California that are so gung-ho to advance one point of view, the sexual libertine license, anything goes culture. And that's what they're doing in California. It's very sad to me because I grew up there.
Yes.
I have family there still. And to see them, you know, it's not live and let live anymore. It's you've got to go our direction, and there's no room for people who want to disagree or live a biblical way. It's sad.
We had David Horowitz on the program earlier in the week, and he said one of the things that we put on one of our magazines is scratch a progressive and you find a totalitarian. In other words, and that was the case because, Penna, you remember a time when what we heard from those in the gay movement, the homosexual movement, the gay activists, look, we just want to be able to get married. We just want to have an equal standing. But the moment they gained any kind of superiority, the moment they gained the legalization of same-sex marriage, then it wasn't, well, okay, you can have your views and we can have our views. No, you hold to our views or we will drive you out of business. We will no longer allow you to bake a cake, no longer allow you to be a photographer, no longer allow you to be a florist. In this case, we'll no longer allow you to make these books and counseling programs available.
One of the really interesting things, we had at IPI, we had Alan Dershowitz in for a luncheon speech 2 or 3 weeks ago. Alan Dershowitz, a longtime civil libertarian, longtime member of the board of the ACLU and so forth. Floyd Abrams, another person who was a longtime civil libertarian, fighting for free speech in the 60s. They're now coming up and it's amazing to them what they're seeing. They've had to flip almost because they're still standing for free speech as progressives, and they're proud liberals and progressives, but they see the movement that they helped spawn now going in completely the opposite direction toward that totalitarian, and they're not sure what to do about that. I mean, they're speaking out against it. Alan Dershowitz said at our lunch he's on the, I think he says the liberal diet because none of his his liberal friends will ever invite him to speak at a lunch anymore. Because he stands up for the Constitution, freedom of speech, open debate, and he says he says in law school, if you're going to come into law school, you better be willing to take some hard knocks, because you're going to hear it from a judge, you're going to hear it from the other attorney. He said he's just amazed that this is happening.
Think of some of the people who the authors of books who would be banned. I mean, these are people, Kerby, that you've had on Point of View. Robert George, he writes very eloquently on these things. Ryan Anderson.
Oh, sure.
What about Nancy Pearcey? What about Maggie Gallagher? What about Jennifer Roback Morse, who I've had on Point of View? Denny Burke, who's a friend of mine. Ann Paulk. I mean, there's all kinds of people whose books would not be able to be sold. They said they would even go after Amazon for selling these books in California. I mean, I wonder if they would take Point of View off the air.
Yeah.
Because we would be interviewing those authors. I mean, it's draconian and it's sad. And I think there's so many directions from which the church is being attacked right now. I mean, Kelly can tell you about many of them through the religious liberty sort of lens, I guess. I think the church needs to be aware and cognizant. We need to take this seriously, because it's really happening. I mean, there's people that have been elected to office that are trying to push this kind of thing.
I love your comment about Alan Dershowitz, too. I mean, Alan Dershowitz, call your office, because, it wasn't until a couple of years ago that we had him on Point of View, and now I'm seeing him on Fox News all the time.
Yes.
And occasionally you'll see him on MSNBC, but it's almost like the moment liberals and progressives had control, they wanted to do book burning in ways that they condemned, rightly so, what had happened, say, in Nazi Germany. But this totalitarian kind of mindset is really troubling, I think, even to other civil libertarians.
It is, and he mentioned that after they had raided Donald Trump's lawyer's office, Michael Cohen, I believe, the ACLU did not speak out against it. So I heard Alan on NPR saying, "Well, I've been with that organization for, I think he said 55 years. They did not speak out against the government raiding a personal attorney's office and taking that material. He just does. He sort of feels like he doesn't know where he fits in anymore."
I would think so. Of course, John Whitehead's been on there talking about this, and Alan Dershowitz. But some people that we haven't had on, they're on more because they just can't believe what's happening over there. And like you said, Penna, I mean, just think of all the authors we've had over the years that their books would be banned, including, of course, Ryan Anderson. When Harry Became Sally,
yeah.
That one on transgender would be the first one they'd want to take off the market. Anyway, we need to take a break. When we come back, since Penna mentioned religious liberty, and since Kelly's not here, we'll let you put on your Kelly Shackelford hat for just a moment, talk about some of the religious liberty issues. We have a lot more to talk about. How about Starbucks and the whole issue of racism? We've talked about Mike Pompeo. We'll come back to that. Andrew McCabe, I should say. And James Comey, I'm so busy talking about everybody but them, are in the news, so we'll be talking about them as well. All that coming up right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you've been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us. It is our weekend edition. In studio with us, Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation. We have a lot to cover in the next couple of hours. First of all, of course, today is the National School Walkout. So I'd love to hear from some of you as we open up the phones. Did your students walk out, or did they go to school and stay in class? More than 2,600 walkouts are planned, and most of them have already taken place across the country. But those of you in the Pacific time zone perhaps haven't had all of those walkouts take place. And, of course, our listeners in Alaska still in an even further time zone. But for the East Coast and Central time zone, those walkouts probably have already taken place. The number 11 is going to come up a lot today. First of all, Mark Thiessen says that there are 11 senators who are about to make a big mistake by not confirming out of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee Mike Pompeo. But in the House of Representatives, you have 11 House members who have sent a letter to the Attorney General Jeff Sessions requesting that they initiate a criminal investigation into FBI Director James Comey, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, former Attorney General Loretta Lynch, former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. We'll have more to say about that in just a minute, as well as FBI agents Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. So those are a couple of issues. One of the other articles we've posted we'll get to a little bit later, a very good piece by Dr. Merrill Matthews about teachers' salaries and the fact that, if nothing else, if we were really to get our priorities straight, we should raise teachers' salaries by draining the public school administrators' swamp. And, of course, the ongoing debate about Starbucks and racism. So we have lots to cover. But, Penna Dexter, we don't have Kelly Shackelford with us today. But sometimes we start this program on Fridays talking about religious liberty. And we've got a case about a chaplain, don't we?
We do. But first, I just wanted to mention there was a first in the United States Senate yesterday. On the floor of the Senate, it's the first time that there was a baby that actually participated in a floor vote, a brand new baby girl on the floor of the Senate, and they actually had to change the rules for Senator Tammy Duckworth, who just had a baby girl, brought her in because she wanted to make sure she could vote against Jim Bridenstine, who was being confirmed as a head of NASA. Of course, Tammy Duckworth is a liberal, but I think everybody kind of came together in admiration for this cute little baby girl who actually had to get a jacket, her mom thought, because you have to wear a jacket. That's part of the dress code in the Senate. So they got her a jacket.
They didn't give the baby a vote, did they?
No, they didn't get to vote. Mom voted, but Jim Bridenstine was still confirmed.
It's a real narrow majority there for the Republicans have, so you can't.
Well, and maybe we should give out some pacifiers to a few of these people that have been talking too long in the United States Senate.
You could argue there's a lot of babies on the Senate floor.
Yes, we certainly could do that. So we have a lot to cover, but thank you for that one that is most significant, a baby on the floor and the well of the United States Senate. But help us out with some of the religious liberty issues, because even though First Liberty is not here, we always like to keep the tradition going.
We do, and since I'm not Kelly, I'm going to rely on Todd Starnes, who loves to write for Fox News, and he has a radio show about these cases, and we always appreciate him publicizing them. But he talks about a decorated Army chaplain, and he received or is receiving a career-ending punishment because he moved. He's a chaplain. He started working at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, and when he did that, he was going to be conducting something called Strong Bonds, which is a marriage program there. And somebody signed up, I guess it was a lesbian couple that signed up. And he, because of the sort of the beliefs of the sending agency, which is the Southern Baptist North American Mission Board, they believe the Bible, and they don't believe that marriage is between two women or two men. And so he didn't feel that he could teach this program and have participants that were same-sex couples. So he just had it somebody else do it, and he didn't do it. Well, he's in big trouble in the military because there was a big complaint about it. He spent 25 years serving his country, and he's decorated. But I think it was Mikey Weinstein and his group who actually complained, and we've heard from them before. But he could lose his job. And First Liberty is on this case, and they're working with the military to try to get this changed. But this is another one of those persecution of chaplain in the military cases. A couple of the other developments, I think, on First Liberty's sort of on their docket right now is Coach Kennedy's case. And we've got a beautiful picture of the coach praying at the football field, Joe Kennedy. And, of course, he's in trouble because people could see him praying. But I think the biggest one right now is there has been, it's the Klein case. And the Kleins, Aaron and Melissa Klein, of course, have a bakery in Oregon. They had it. They've lost that business. They've been forced to pay $135,000 for refusing to bake a cake for a same-sex, quote-unquote, wedding. This was even before same-sex weddings were forced on the states. But they got so many awful messages from people in their area who just disagreed with that. Like, here's one: we hope your children get cancer and die. I hope you have the worst luck and the worst life, and all your wildest nightmares come true. And so, they're really under attack because they wouldn't create a custom cake to celebrate and communicate approval of this same-sex wedding. Well, just last month, First Liberty actually filed an appeal with the state about this case. So this is a case now that whether it goes the wrong way or the right way, probably in Oregon, could end up at the U.S. Supreme Court. And I think it's we have the Masterpiece Bakery case there, which could go either Jack Phillips' rights to refuse to bake a cake could be upheld, or it could be, and it could affect the whole nation, and it could affect the Kleins, or it could be decided very narrowly for him. And in that case, we still need to get a case to the Supreme Court that affirms the rights of same-sex, of Christians to, refuse to celebrate same-sex weddings. All these wedding vendors across the country are having their rights violated. So this is a big case, and it was something that was highlighted by First Liberty this month. And the idea that this is such a battle between the left and right. We talked in the first hour, and a lot of people weren't listening then, about the state of California and how they're just forcing a homosexual agenda through so many avenues into their laws. And I think it's the same thing being done through the courts on businesses and others, through the military. And so it's something that Christians have to stand up against because no one else will. And we are facing now, I think, a time when there's a big division between those who hold to traditional values and hold to the tenets of their faith and the secular left. It's a battle.
Yes. Well, and again, when we talk about the military, we did talk about a positive last week from Colonel Leland Bohannon. And here's an individual where he said, I couldn't in good conscience sign this spousal appreciation document, but I want to make sure it's signed, so I'll give this to the 2-star general to sign it. Mm-hmm. And in the case of Aaron and Melissa Klein, they said, well, we can't bake the cake, but the one down the street can. These pharmacists had said, I can't maybe give you an abortifacient, but there's a pharmacy right over here that can. So it's not like you are denying individuals, but there are just all sorts of people that want to take them to the court.
You have to affirm us.
Yeah, that's right. We've got a lot to cover. We will do so right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Dr. Ann Bradley has been on my radio program and in a recent article talks about her first trip to the Soviet Union. Even as a teenager, she could see through the attempt to make Russia look more prosperous than it was. In fact, her visit was one of the reasons she became an economist. She ends her article by telling the true story of what happened when Boris Yeltsin visited the United States. He was newly elected to the Soviet Parliament and the Supreme Soviet. After he visited the Johnson Space Center, he made an unscheduled stop at Randall's grocery store in Houston. The trip to this simple grocery store changed him forever. Yeltsin roamed the aisles to see a number of products available to every customer. They were offering free cheese samples. He was overwhelmed. He could not believe the bounty before him. Even members of the elite Politburo did not have the choices available to every person who walked into the store. A reporter captured his comments in an article in the Houston Chronicle. He said, "When I saw those shelves crammed with hundreds, thousands of cans, cartons, and goods of every possible sort, for the first time I felt quite frankly sick with despair for the Soviet people." He went on to say that such a potentially super-rich country as ours had been brought to such a state of poverty. It is terrible to think of it. What a statement from a man who was powerful and well-connected politically. He may have had great political power in Russia, but he was powerless to provide it to the Russian people, what was typical for all Americans. The communist government failed to provide the basic necessities for their people, and this is what happens in a centrally controlled economy. This is a lesson we need to pass on to our children and grandchildren. The abundance of goods on the shelves of the Houston grocery store weren't provided by the government. They were provided by a free market. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Hi, this is Michael Ferris. I am the President, CEO, and General Counsel of Alliance Defending Freedom, and I've been friends with Point of View Radio for decades. This is such a great radio ministry. I'm personally a partner with Point of View, and I would encourage each of you to be a partner. Point of View gets information in a timely fashion to people who need to know the truth, and Point of View brings you the truth. It brings you a Christian perspective on the news, and it calls you to prayer and action in a timely manner. I'll never forget the day that freedom was preserved in the homeschool arena because of the work of Point of View Radio, leading the charge on that. And so always been grateful for that and would encourage you to be a part of the Point of View team. God bless you.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Michael Ferris now with Alliance Defending Freedom, of course, has been well known as an individual that has been with the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. But ADF right now has two cases. One, of course, that has to do with Jack Phillips. You mentioned just a minute ago the Masterpiece Bake Cake case. And then the other one that he actually argued on the Pregnancy Resource Centers out of California, forcing them to post information about abortion in their pregnancy centers. So we'll see how those cases come down. 2 cases with ADF and potentially 6 cases with First Liberty that could or could not be taken by the Supreme Court. So lots to talk about here today, Penna.
Yeah, that's why I think a lot of people supported President Trump. You know, a lot of Christians that I know, they've seen some of the things that have happened since he's been in the White House, but really their main reason was the Supreme Court, because they could see so many issues that really are of concern to believers, hitting the Supreme Court and needing to tip the balance once Scalia was gone. And so that was their motivation, and that was part of the reason I think we've got him in the White House.
Well, again, we are going to, in just a few minutes, talk about 11 senators that might make a big mistake by not confirming Mike Pompeo. But let's talk about 11 House Republicans sent a letter to the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, and want further investigation into James Comey and also Andrew McCabe. We have an article about that. And first of all, we have Dr. Merrill Matthews, some of the memos now from James Comey.
Mm-hmm.
You've had a chance to look at those. And there are a lot of people that are saying, I think they're right, that this vindicates the position and the statements that Donald Trump has been making.
Oh, I think it has. There's no smoking gun in there. It doesn't seem like for Donald Trump. If anything, it may reflect poorly on Comey in some areas. And so, yes, the story goes on. They released the memos after the Justice Department was trying to hold off on that, but I believe that they've released them now. And they've been redacted, and you can go online and you can read through them, and it's his mostly notes saying this is what I was thinking, this is what was happening there. But it seems a good bit self-serving. I mean,
after I have conversations with people, I don't write myself a memo.
I don't write, and they're long memos. I sometimes will make a few notes that such and such asked me to do this and get this done by this date or something like that. But it's long memos, sort of expressing what he was thinking at the time, what he thought Donald Trump was thinking. It's very odd. And then, of course, he ended up releasing these and then trying to releasing what apparently is going to be some classified information to somebody in order to leak to the press, which could put him in a certain amount of trouble.
There you go. That's right.
So now that's turning around, and actually the people that opposed Donald Trump, basically, and tried to defeat him through the FBI and the Justice Department are now seeing themselves in legal trouble.
Yeah. Michael Barone put it this way. I should maybe post this one, too. Well, maybe I'll post it next week. But he starts out, and you know Michael Barone. He's been speaking for you there at IPI. He says, as the likelihood that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia seems headed towards zero, the likelihood of proof of a different form of collusion seems headed upward towards certainty. A little bit later, he says, meanwhile, the evidence builds of collusion by the Obama administration, law enforcement, and intelligence personnel in trying to elect Hillary Clinton and defeat and delegitimize Trump in and after the 2016 election. That is what some of us refer to, Penna, as kind of a boomerang. You know, they thought that they were going to use this to bring down Donald Trump. I'm wondering whether this brings down or certainly puts in jeopardy Andrew McCabe, James Comey, Loretta Lynch, Peter Strzok, and Lisa Page, maybe even Hillary Clinton. What are your thoughts?
Well, the more information that keeps being uncovered as the digging is done, the more you're wondering whether that may or may not be the case. And the Justice Department's internal watchdog asked for Michael Horowitz. He is the IG of Justice, and he sent a criminal referral on Andrew McCabe, who was the second in command at the FBI, to the D.C. Attorney's Office, at the U.S. Attorney's Office there. And he makes the case that he had repeatedly lied to investigators. And certainly we know already from information that's been coming out that he did a lot to try to undermine and defeat Trump's actual election. And then since he's elected, to undermine him. And so we may see him and others now referred. And so it's going to be interesting. On the other side of this, you mentioned the memos that were released, and even James Comey, who's head of the FBI, admitted that he was leaking some things to try to get a special prosecutor, who ended up being Bob Mueller, appointed. And so now that, has gone beyond, it really has not found evidence of collusion with the Russians, but is finding things now that could come back to bite Comey, McCabe, and others.
I'm just amazed at the what I would call bad judgment of Comey on some things, and in ways that just sort of seem somewhat tangential. In his book tour now, he's talking about how his wife and daughter went and marched for Hillary Clinton, went to the women's march
yes.
right after the inauguration.
What's that about?
And this is it, I just find this so strange. I mean, because I write for publications and various things out there, and IPI is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. I won't put political signs in my yard. I don't let my wife put political signs in the yard. We do things. We try to say, and I'm not director of the FBI.
Yeah.
You just in a position. I don't want people to think I'm siding with something and that I could use what I do as a way to try to promote those people. So you don't do it publicly. And yet, if your wife is marching for Hillary Clinton, what does everybody else think about that? And Andrew McCabe, I think, wasn't his wife at the victory party that didn't turn out to be a victory party.
Jill McCabe, and of course she received money from Terry McAuliffe, so we can talk about that. By the way, as we're coming to a break, I wanted to also mention that we have posted this article by Katie Pavlich, in which you can find some of that, because you might just say, okay, I hear you guys talking about this, but can I read something that helps put some of that in perspective? And I'll just give you one of the quotes here, and maybe Penna has another one she wants to pick out, but this one from Tom Fitton, who's been on the program with us before with Judicial Watch. Mm-hmm. He said, the wheels of justice finally caught up with Andrew McCabe for repeatedly lying under oath to investigators. Then Tom Fitton goes on to say, it's high time America had some accountability for his misconduct. And, of course, we're talking about Andrew McCabe, who's the deputy director, but still, this is important to this conversation. And Judicial Watch has uncovered, it says, conflicting handling of the Clinton investigation. And they also find that FBI and Andrew McCabe's corruption generated irresistible public pressure for accountability. So these are some resources that are available, Penna, but if nothing else, we haven't talked about it every day because after a while, everybody else is talking about James Comey and Andrew McCabe, but today we are for a few minutes, and I think if people want to find some of these articles, it'll help them understand what's taking place.
One thing we did talk about over the months is the lack of seriousness of investigating Hillary Clinton's private email server and the fact that she allowed classified information to go through that server and it wasn't secured or protected, and the lying and the cover up about that. And that's one thing I think that is surfacing now, is that how unseriously that was taken by Comey and the FBI compared to this kind of made up charge about Trump collusion with Russia. So Tom Fitton then says that these are all of this that's coming out now is further proof that both the Clinton email and Trump-Russia investigations were irredeemably compromised, and that the Clinton email investigation was actually a sham.
Wow. Let's take a break, and when we come back, I want to take some of your phone calls. Perhaps you have some comments. We just started by talking about this national school walkout, which is taking place today. 2,600 walkouts. Did your children or grandchildren walk out, or did they stay in school? One of the other questions certainly want to put on the table is what about this book tour by James Comey and some of this information now coming out about Andrew McCabe and others? Love to get your thoughts about that. So looking at 11 House Republicans that have sent a letter to the Attorney General's office. When we come back, we'll talk about 11 senators that are about to make a big mistake. That's what Mark Thiessen says. We'll take your calls at 1-800-351-1212.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers, defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews in studio. One of the things we talked about just a minute ago is 11 members of the House of Representatives sending the letter, but I thought this is a piece that we might talk about, Penna Dexter, as well. You sent this one around for us. 11 senators who are about to make a big mistake. And the mistake is something we just talked about briefly yesterday. Mike Pompeo, who serves as the CIA director, is obviously being considered to be the Secretary of State. That is usually one of those foregone conclusions that after you go to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and give some testimony, routinely, almost always, that nominee is passed out, usually unanimously, sometimes with a close vote, but not where there would actually be a vote against him. And given the fact that you have a number of Democrats and now one Republican, got to mention, Rand Paul, it's possible that for the first time since 1925, the Secretary of State nominee would not be favorably reported out of the committee.
Yeah. Usually, if you are a president and you have, an idea who you want to be Secretary of State, you get that person. In history, it's been, and we cited the statistics earlier. I'll have to pull them out again, but there's rarely a vote, even a single vote, against a president's nominee. And here, it's almost all the Democrats. First of all, he may not even pass the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. If he does, he'll go out to the floor and he'll barely win, is probably what will happen. But this is just, it's very sad because it's become so political. And Pompeo, it's not that he's being voted down because he's not brilliant. He was director of the CIA. He was a member of Congress, and he has a law degree from Harvard. So and he's done a good job. In fact, a lot of Democrats voted to confirm him for the CIA, but they've changed their tune. I think it's partly because actually this came out last week that Trump sent Pompeo, while he's still at the CIA, to North Korea. He already spoke with Kim Jong-un. He's trying to set the stage to end the Korean War that's, kind of still has an armistice going on. So he's doing something outlandishly, unheard of and would, be a plus on Trump's resume, and they don't want that.
And I think Democrats need to remember the day may come when they are back in control of the White House and the Senate, and they're going to want Republicans to confirm their Democratic presidential nominees, or at least allow them to get through that. And that's what has happened in the past. You've had a number of Republicans, when Democrats were up, John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, and so forth, they said, this isn't the person who I would nominate, but the person's qualified and so forth, so they vote them out because the president has the right to be able to nominate that person, assuming that person is generally qualified. But this is going to turn around on Democrats at some point in the future, and they will complain, much like when they took the nuclear option and said we're going to allow justices below the Supreme Court and so forth to be done without a filibuster. They regretted that later. They will regret this kind of stonewalling now.
Well, again, let's just use the most recent examples, and that is Hillary Clinton received 2 no votes. She was passed out, I think, without any negative ones out of the committee, but 2 no votes in the entire Senate. John Kerry had 3 no votes. And this is sort of typical that when it's a Supreme Court nominee, whether it's Ruth Bader Ginsburg or Justice Stephen Breyer, they were overwhelmingly approved. But then when it came down for Samuel Alito or a variety of others, or more recently,
John Roberts.
Neil Gorsuch, now it's a close vote. And so the game sometimes, as you said, isn't even played fairly. Sometimes the Republicans would say, okay, we'll pay back, but there's never a payback. It's almost always that if a Democratic president puts a nominee to the Supreme Court, to the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, those are rarely, if ever, even challenged. But on the other hand, the game played a little differently when it's a Republican, in this case, Donald Trump, and the possibility that this would be, as I said, the first time since 1925. of course, before 1925 had votes which were not recorded publicly.
Right, they were closed.
So there has never been a time in which you've had a Secretary of State nominee that received an unfavorable committee vote. This might be the very first, and that just shows how political everything's become.
Yeah. And then, but when you go out to the floor, even that to me is shocking that you would be so closely divided. I think Heidi Heitkamp from one of the Dakotas and also another senator, Bill Johnson, I believe, have said because they're from fairly red districts, it's still political,
Yes.
that they will support him. And, you know, it's kind of hard to argue with his record of accomplishment and how well he's run the CIA in the time that he's been there. But, you know, as you said, Kerby, Democrats have been unanimously confirmed in these are recent presidencies. Warren Christopher under Clinton, Cyrus Vance approved unanimously. Colin Powell he's a Republican, and the Democrats all voted for him. Kissinger even did well. So this is just a custom in the Senate, this collegial body that we used to recognize as, you know, very gentlemanly, does not give now President Trump his due. So it's going to be another battle. And actually, Mark Thiessen in the Washington Post pointed out that this really hurts the Senate Foreign Relations Committee more than it does Mike Pompeo, because he will likely be confirmed, and he'll go ahead and do a great job as Secretary of State.
Let me just mention, too, that one of the other articles we posted, we talked about Andrew McCabe just a minute ago. One of the other articles we have here is by our friend Ken Blackwell, and it's from The Stream, and it's entitled Pompeo, a Proven Leader. Just reminds us, this is a guy first in his class at West Point, 5 years in active service during the Cold War, Harvard Law School graduate, editor of the Harvard Law Review, member of Congress, director of the CIA, and now we're going to say he's not qualified to be the Secretary of State. Dr. Merrill Matthews, I've heard you say before the comparison between the previous Secretary of State and this one. How do those measure up here?
It's strange because Rex Tillerson, former CEO of Exxon, he had met with a lot of international leaders. He had worked with them in business and so forth, but he had no real Washington experience. He was probably the least qualified person to move into the role of Secretary of State. He got approved. Mike Pompeo may be the most qualified person, and he may not get approved. How does that make sense?
It doesn't. And you think about Hillary Clinton being approved in the committee 16-1 at the time when there were questions, which we just talked about foreign donors to the Clinton Foundation and a variety of other things. Of course, that's before we had all the other issues. And there was no concern about this. I mean, I understand it was Hillary Clinton, but you just see something that is troubling to see. And also, is this going to be a trend or a preview of coming attractions, as I say?
You know, I
Not
think
a good one.
This may go back to something I remember you talking about decades ago when Robert Bork was coming up, because he had a paper trail, and that paper trail was used against him.
Sure.
And I remember you saying something along the lines of it may get to be to the point where you have to have Supreme Court nominees who have no paper trail so that they can't use something against them. I hope we don't get to the point on the Secretary of State where you have to go to someone who has no paper trail, like a Rex Tillerson, in order to get him approved, because if he has a background and he's worked and taken votes and so forth, that automatically sort of disqualifies him. It's a strange situation.
You need people. I think it's great to have a Secretary of State who served in various parts of the government already, but that does give you a paper trail, especially if you voted, taken votes in Congress like Mike Pompeo has.
Real quickly, just before we take a break, two of the people that were, actually three of the people most critical, let's take each one of those. One is in Virginia. We have listeners in Virginia, and Tim Kaine, of course, was indeed an individual that ran with Hillary Clinton, and he had some concerns about the fact that indeed Mike Pompeo supports the removal of this Iranian nuclear deal. Well, I love the Wall Street Journal saying Mr. Kaine might recall that Donald Trump campaigned and won while opposing the Iran nuclear deal. And if Mr. Tim Kaine is still sore about the outcome, he could have told his running mate to campaign in Wisconsin. We have listeners in California, and Dianne Feinstein has been upset about some things he said about the LGBT community and also about Muslims. But again, that might have to do with a primary challenge. And then, of course, we can talk about also New Jersey, and the individual there also brought up the LGBT. It seems like they're more concerned about how you stand on gay rights than what you would do as Secretary of State, which shows you how that just seems to trump everything these days.
Well, we're coming up on a break, but this is another whole part of this, the religious test idea. I mean, we've had other senators that have basically floated a sort of religious test for nominees to be confirmed, and Cory Booker of New Jersey did that in the hearings in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
We'll come back and talk about that one, too, because I just mentioned Virginia and California, but for our listeners in New Jersey, we'll talk about Cory Booker. I think he's running for the presidency. What do you think?
I'm thinking he's done everything but put his name in.
Yeah, so there may be some other alternative motives to that, but if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212, lots on the table. We'll take your calls right after this.
With unemployment at a low 4.1%, businesses are complaining that they can't find enough workers. The Wall Street Journal says the shortage is due in part to government benefits that corrode a culture of work. Consider SNAP, the nation's food stamp program. More than 40 million Americans are in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. That's up from 17 million in 2000. Since then, the benefits and total cost of the program have exploded. Between 2000 and 2008, food stamp spending doubled. Due to the 2008 recession, the Obama administration allowed states to waive the work requirements that existed for SNAP participants. More than after previous recessions, food stamp recipients have stayed in the program, and SNAP spending has now nearly doubled again. SNAP benefits should be reserved for poor people, but the program has long operated under a policy of broad-based categorical eligibility. In 30 states, that means a low-income person with plenty of net worth is still eligible. A person who draws on or even receives information about government assistance can get food stamps. The Farm Bill, introduced in the House of Representatives, features a requirement that able-bodied Americans ages 18 through 59 and receiving food stamps work at least 20 hours per week. There are exemptions for the disabled and anyone who is pregnant or caring for a child under 6. About a third of current participants will be subject to the new rules. This should save taxpayers around $90 billion over the next 10 years. According to the Journal, those who stop receiving benefits because of a work requirement will fall into two categories. Either they refused to work or train for work, or they found a job. Polls show that nearly 90% of the public agrees that able-bodied adults should be required to work or prepare for work as a requirement for receiving assistance. Our system should reflect such wisdom. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Point of View is a part of my daily life, and I know of no other radio program that helps its listeners to develop, articulate, and then defend a biblical worldview as successfully as yours does. For those reasons, I consider it an honor to be able to support Point of View financially, and I would encourage all of your listeners, both young and old, to prayerfully consider doing the same.
I just turned your program on, and I want to just let you know I was working in an abortion clinic when abortion first became legal, and I thought I was helping women. And the Lord showed me in a very powerful way, as He removed the veil from me, what exactly I'd been involved in. And I am proof of forgiveness. And I want to just let you know how much I appreciate just getting the truth out.
I really appreciate your program. I don't get to listen to it every day because I have to work, but it's a really a blessing to me and to all of us.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Heck, once again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Weekend edition, Penna Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews with us. And we mentioned Cory Booker. And before we get too far, I also want to come back to your commentary that we just played a minute ago, Penna. But Cory Booker is the senator from New Jersey. Pretty obvious, as Dr. Merrill Matthews said, he's all but put his name in the hat. So I think he's running for the presidency. And I've the other day was speaking in front of an audience, and they were saying, well, do you think Donald Trump will be reelected? So it's a little bit early. There are all sorts of things that could happen. Mike Pence could instead run. He could decide to be one term, all that kind of stuff. But let's look at who would run against him. And I said, okay, for example, the senator from California. Anybody know her name?
Kamala Harris.
Yeah, nobody could give him the name. Nobody in the room. These are pretty politically active.
That's because I'm kind of wonky about
you could give it. And so I said, New Jersey, can you name the New Jersey senator? And one person could give the name Cory Booker. I said, and I can go down the list. I said, now most of you probably know Elizabeth Warren. And of course, maybe people feel the burn, and Bernie Sanders. But I said, here's the problem. Most people don't know the person that might run against Donald Trump. But Cory Booker is working real hard right now, Penna, to get some attention. And he's been getting attention by asking some pretty tough questions, not just of Mike Pompeo, but a variety of other people, right?
I don't think the attention he's getting gets him a lot of brownie points. It does for the far left.
Yeah.
And Cory Booker.
To win a primary.
Yeah,
maybe.
he used to be somewhat of more of a moderate Democrat, but he's moved left. And, he's probably done it to win primaries, right? That's what you have to do in the Democrat Party. But at this Pompeo hearing, I think people who haven't paid attention to what went on in that hearing should be disturbed, because he asked Cory Booker, he asked Mike Pompeo, who's a Christian, by the way, and he supports marriage between a man and a woman, if he viewed homosexuality as a perversion. That was the question he asked. And of course, when you answer truthfully, you get in big trouble. But he did push him because of his faith. And he said, have you ever been, or do you continue to be, an Orthodox Christian? There's the religious test that he asked about. And he said that, and then he said, and Pompeo is a Christian, that Pompeo's beliefs don't reflect the nation's values. Wow.
Well, Dr. Merrill Matthews, you're a historian and buff. I can remember a time. Have you ever been, or are you still a member of the Communist Party?
And
yes, now
indeed.
It's a have you ever been, or are you now an Orthodox Christian, which is seen as a litmus test by at least Senator Cory Booker to determine whether or not you can serve as the Secretary of State.
And this strikes me as the Democrats' real challenge. If they were able to put up a moderate person to challenge Donald Trump, I'd give that person a fair chance of being able to beat him. They are moving so far left that it is going to, I think it's virtually certain that the Democratic nominee will support a single-payer health care system, all kinds of various rights for various, with regard to transgender and so forth, and it maybe even reparations.
Yes,
for the African American community. It's just amazing what has happened there, and I think it's going to be a turnoff for an awful lot of voters, even if at that time in 2020 they're not wild about Donald Trump. I think they're going to be just really distraught at the Democratic option.
Let's come back to that, because Cory Booker did say that he supported the Bernie Sanders idea. And so what is before was sort of an outlier. Bernie Sanders wants socialized medicine. He wants a single-payer plan. He wants the government to take over. He wants basically what we have with the VA to be what you have for every American. That used to be the kind of the bizarre, maybe extreme view of Bernie Sanders. Cory Booker and Elizabeth Warren and some of the others who might run against Donald Trump, they all pretty much have signed off on that now.
That's right. In not too long ago, if you wanted to clear out a room of Democratic senators, you ask who supports single-payer health care system. And they all had to go take a call real quickly. Now I think you've got 17 who signed off with Bernie Sanders on that. And when you're looking at that, they're all the potential candidates for this, and they are going to push that system hard. And the amazing thing to me is that they say you trusted us to do Obamacare. We said we'd do it right. Now we completely messed that up. Now trust us to do single payer right.
So it's something like Medicare for all.
Yes.
Yeah, that's how they position it.
I mean, how do we pay for that?
Yeah. Well, and again, Medicare for all sounds better because a lot of people like Medicare. But if you say VA for all, people go,
If you say Medicaid for all.
Yeah.
But even there, a number of states, California's been dealing with the notion of maybe we want to try to pass a single-payer healthcare system for the state, which I would argue is virtually impossible because they can't deal with the seniors. Seniors are under Medicare. That's federal policy. So even if you want to try to say we want a state-based single-payer healthcare system, you're not going to get the seniors in that, and that's a huge portion of it. So you've already started to whittle away at some of this.
Well, and again, it's the cost issue. Let me use an illustration. You know, if I'm driving down the road and I see the warning light on my car, I can do something about it. Or I just take a piece of electrician's tape and put a piece of tape over the warning light.
I've done that.
And I'm
It's
good.
not there anymore.
It's not there anymore. And isn't that sort of what has been happening lately with Medicaid payments, Medicare payments, what's happening at the states? Not to mention the fact that we have members of Congress that seemingly have no problem with a $1.3 trillion spending plan. But again, back to this whole issue of Medicare and Medicaid, you're the expert on health care. We've got some major disasters unfolding in some of these states that are actually where we broadcast today.
We absolutely do. In most states, the education was the largest expenditure item.
Yes.
Increasingly in several states, Medicaid is pushing out education. And even as they try to push it even more, the state legislators are saying, look, you want us to do education, but you also want us to do Medicaid. You're not going to be able to get both because they're so large. So if you say we have to do Medicaid, be prepared to have some cuts in education.
Wow. Would never have seen that coming unless you were looking at those numbers that Dr. Merrill Matthews was, but now that's where we are. We need to take a break. When we come back in the last hour, a couple of things. First of all, we got a very good piece by Dr. Merrill Matthews, Raise Teachers' Salaries by Draining the Public School Administrators' Swamp. And we have yet to talk about Starbucks, the whole issue of racism, but also something we mentioned yesterday, the solution that is being put forward, which actually David French talked about in terms of the implicit association test, does not actually meet any kind of scholastic muster and probably will do more harm than good. So we've got Starbucks and teacher salaries and all sorts of things to talk about in this last hour. So let me encourage you to look at some of those articles. We have those on Starbucks and on teacher salaries, but also the ones we've talked about, Democrats trying to block Mike Pompeo, and also some of the concerns about James Comey and Andrew McCabe, all available at our website, pointofview.net. And as you go there, you might click on that button if you'd like to help us out financially. That is another option. But again, there's a lot of material that we've posted for you to take, to post on your webpage or your Facebook page, and to educate others. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Last hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. An open line. It is our weekend edition, and Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews with us. And before we end this hour, I also want to talk a little bit about the Institute for Policy Innovation, IPI.org, and we'll actually even get into his article on teachers' salaries. But I thought this hour we might talk about Starbucks and the charges of racism. Now, the two individuals that were actually handcuffed have now spoken out. So if you take their story at face value, what they said is Rashawn Nelson and Dante Robinson walked into a Starbucks on April 12th. At 4:35 p.m. That's important to understand. That's what they said, at least in Good Morning America. And they said that almost immediately the store manager caused problems because they asked if they could use the bathroom, which usually when you just go into Starbucks, you go use it anyway. But they were told that restrooms were for paying customers. Well, immediately, actually, they argue less than a few minutes later, there was a 911 call. And that argument is that these are two individuals that are here loitering, and they have been asked to leave but did not. And so, of course, then we pick up the video that most everybody has seen, where that is where they're being arrested. Now, the argument from Dante Robinson was, we wasn't read any rights, just double lock, handcuffed behind our backs and escorted out and put in a squad car. So I'm reading exactly what he said. And so you have, of course, then the call for a boycott of Starbucks, which has now caused all sorts of issues here because progressives have said their only crime was sitting while black, is the argument being made. And so because of this, the CEO has tried to solve the problem, ameliorate some of this, finally decided that they are actually on May 29th going to close down 8,000 of these company-owned stores and force 175,000 of these employees to undergo racial bias training in dealing with even so-called unconscious racial bias. We'll get into some of the questions that David French asked about, but Penna, this has become a major issue. We've heard about boycotts of Chick-fil-A, Hobby Lobby. This is a little bit different. Starbucks has always been positioned as sort of a liberal progressive institution, but then there are people calling for a boycott of Starbucks.
Well, we've had people call for boycotts of Starbucks before for being too liberal or progressive on certain issues. So it means some people are like looking at this and going, oh, it's fun to sit around and watch the left eat their own. But I mean, I love Starbucks coffee, and I'm not going to boycott Starbucks because I'm addicted to it. But we could just talk about what happened there. And, first of all, we all weren't there, so we see the video, but we didn't really see all the pieces and parts that went together on this. I mean, in one sense, there's nothing wrong with calling the cops on people that are loitering and requiring that someone, partake of what you're offering if they're going to stay in the store, and especially if you're going to use the bathroom. On the other side of that, they're black men, and it sounds like the way they were treated wasn't exactly done politely, and so, perhaps they have a beef. But boy, this has really exploded.
Oh, it certainly has. One of the articles I've posted, by the way, by Kyle Smith, I love it. He says, sometimes when we see everything through a racist lens is a problem. He says, this is your brain on race at a protest outside the Starbucks at the typically tranquil corner of 8th and Spruce Streets, reports the Philadelphia Inquirer. A woman poured a cup of non-Starbucks coffee out on the sidewalk. First of all, I don't understand some of this. Okay, the police might have overreacted, and maybe this one employee did. In a previous world, I think what you would have is they would discipline the manager, maybe fire the manager, notify the employees that this kind of behavior is not tolerated, and that'd be it. Or maybe you'd go and complain to the police. But this national boycott of Starbucks seems like an overreaction. Am I missing something?
Huge overreaction. And from what I understand, the manager was actually enforcing company policy.
Yeah.
Though a lot of us have at times been on a trip or something like that, and we need to go to the restroom. But when I do that, I usually go and buy something either first or after to sort of, because that's sort of what the restroom is there for, is for the customers. It may be, I've heard clips of the
video
employee who has left.
Yes, okay.
I don't think they said she was fired. I think they said she's no longer with us. So we're not entirely sure what happened there. My understanding is that the audio from her calling 911, she's a little bit over the top in that. So you would normally go and address that with the employee and have the employee have the sensitivity training. Because I've been in a number of Starbucks over the years, and I've never seen any hint of what I would consider racism in there. So now you're going to make all the employees pay the penalty for what one employee may have done wrong.
You know, Kyle Smith calls it buying indulgences in the church of the racial enlightenment. But it still buys you no insurance against cries of racism. I think part of the reason that it is because Starbucks is so national and it's everywhere, and we have social media now. And so all of these calls for boycotts or, the news of this happening, it immediately spreads so quickly that Starbucks is trying to sort of soothe some feelings here and be proactive, and that's why they're having this.
Let me open up the phones since calls are already coming in. Might as well do so.
Yeah, might as well.
And have you had an experience like this? Dr. Merrill Matthews would say, well, I've not had one of those, or I've not seen that. But again, maybe it's not been a Starbucks, but maybe you've had somebody rude to you, or maybe you've had somebody call the police on you or something like that. I'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some of those phone calls. But one of the articles I posted yesterday, which I spent just a little bit of time talking about, by David French, is that the test that they're going to be providing to these 175,000 employees is called the implicit bias test. And I hadn't really read too much about that, but it's the IAT test, implicit association test, where they actually put you in front of a computer and you see some different faces. And then, they found that sometimes with people having implicit bias, they might associate weapons with black faces or bad words with Arab faces. And so that's been a suggestion that this shows where we have all sorts of bias we don't know that we have. Well, then he quotes from the Chronicle of Higher Education that basically says the correlation between implicit bias and discriminatory behavior appears weaker than previously thought. Then another one from The Cut, a pile of scholarly work, some of it published in top psychology journals and most of it ignored by the media, suggests that the IAT test falls far short of quality control standards normally expected of psychological instruments. This research suggests is a noisy, unreliable measure that correlates far too weakly with any real-world outcomes to be used to predict individuals' behavior, and even the test's creators have now admitted as such. So we're about ready to put 175,000 people through a test that doesn't exactly meet academic or scholarly scrutiny. And more importantly, some of you say, well, I don't work at Starbucks. If they do this at Starbucks, a lot of other companies saying, yeah, maybe we need to have that test too. So we'll come back and talk about this. Let's open up the phones. Love to get your comments. What about what's happening at Starbucks? 1-800-351-1212. We'll take those calls right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Dr. Ann Bradley has been on my radio program and in a recent article talks about her first trip to the Soviet Union. Even as a teenager, she could see through the attempt to make Russia look more prosperous than it was. In fact, her visit was one of the reasons she became an economist. She ends her article by telling the true story of what happened when Boris Yeltsin visited the United States. He was newly elected to the Soviet Parliament and the Supreme Soviet. After he visited the Johnson Space Center, he made an unscheduled stop at Randall's grocery store in Houston. The trip to this simple grocery store changed him forever. Yeltsin roamed the aisles to see a number of products available to every customer. They were offering free cheese samples. He was overwhelmed. He could not believe the bounty before him. Even members of the elite Politburo did not have the choices available to every person who walked into the store. A reporter captured his comments in an article in the Houston Chronicle. He said, "When I saw those shelves crammed with hundreds, thousands of cans, cartons, and goods of every possible sort, for the first time I felt quite frankly sick with despair for the Soviet people." He went on to say that such a potentially super-rich country as ours had been brought to such a state of poverty. It is terrible to think of it. What a statement from a man who was powerful and well-connected politically. He may have had great political power in Russia, but he was powerless to provide it to the Russian people, what was typical for all Americans. The communist government failed to provide the basic necessities for their people, and this is what happens in a centrally controlled economy. This is a lesson we need to pass on to our children and grandchildren. The abundance of goods on the shelves of the Houston grocery store weren't provided by the government. They were provided by a free market. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Hi, everybody. This is Gary Bauer with American Values in Washington, D.C. You know, I've been involved in big battles in Washington for many, many years. And in those battles, time and time again, it's been Point of View Radio and Kerby Anderson who's provided me with a platform to sound the alarm. Kerby Anderson and Point of View have always been there standing strong. That's why today I'm asking you to join me in giving the most generous contribution you can to Point of View Radio. You know, Point of View and Kerby don't get big subsidies from Washington, D.C. like some liberals do. They depend on generous donors like you who believe in family, faith, and freedom.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Back once again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Appreciate the good work that Gary Bauer does. And again, we have all sorts of calls on the line. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews in studio. And we're talking about Starbucks. But earlier, we've talked about some other issues as well. Everything from Mike Pompeo and Andrew McCabe. We're going to get into the whole issue of teachers' salaries. And, of course, the National School Walkout. All those are fair game if you'd like to join us. But let's head out to Georgia first. Phyllis, what's your point of view?
My point of view is I'm a health professional. I go to Starbucks often, take my computer, and if I have other people from visiting nurse service come in, we sit there and talk until it's time to see the next patient. But the reality is when you go in a restaurant, you wash your hands first.
Wash your hands. Yeah.
You wash your hands. That sounds normal to me. Go to the ladies' room or the men's room and wash your hands.
Yes, and I might just say, men, wash your hands. I think I can never. There are just times, Dr. Matthews and I, we've been in men's rooms before. You see guys walk in, walk out, and go, I think you forgot something here, But it is just amazing how many men do not wash their hands.
I actually follow Phyllis. When I go to a restaurant or something, I oftentimes go to the restroom first in order to wash the hands.
Makes sense. Phyllis, you got a good point there. And these poor guys, I mean, I don't, they said they were waiting for someone. The individual they were waiting for showed up about the time the police did. It seems to me that everyone from the manager to the police officers, law enforcement, should have said, wait a minute, I think we've got a mistake here. We need to back off.
Of course.
Yes.
Of course.
Well, very good.
Okay.
Thanks for
Take
reminding
it easy.
us. First time we've talked about the need to wash your hands here on Point of View in a long time, so that's good. Let's take some more phone calls here. We'll stay in the state of Georgia for just a minute. Bob, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Hello. God bless y'all for what you do. Anyway, I just want to say that I think that it's just too broke to fix.
Racial relations and everything?
The racial thing in America is just out of control. I mean, it's all fabricated. I mean, it's all pretty much sponsored by the left and the media. And in reality, there's precious few people that are really prejudiced anymore. Wake up call. There's just precious few people that are really prejudiced anymore. It's like they're just people. The American blacks have been just so conditioned and manipulated by the left and the left media to believe that everybody's against us and the big evil rich whites are against us and all this. It's all fabrication. I'm 61 years old and my first best friend was black. My mom was from the South, my daddy from the North. And I've seen, prejudice up north and I've seen it down here in the South. But in reality, I just really don't, and I'm a Christian and I go to a really big church, and we are a truly racial church, and
diverse. Yeah.
In my whole world of construction and church, and I come from I grew up hard. I was in prison and everything, but in my true experience, I just really don't believe there's that many people anymore that are truly racist. But there's a lot of people who are very weary because they see what's been going on. They're smart and they see what's been going on. That the left has really manipulated this situation into a place that is so out of control. It's a company as big as Starbucks would do such a thing to protect themselves.
Right. Let me jump in real quickly because, one of the things in the article we've posted here by Kyle Smith, I like the way he puts it. He said, we know racism exists. Mm-hmm. It inflames our sense of injustice, so we're eager to punish it. But it can be frustratingly difficult to prove that a given incident is an example of it. And there were probably some good examples in this case, which is why it's gotten the national attention, because after all, there's been near universal consensus, according to David French in the other article, that the Starbucks employees' actions were racially motivated. And I love what he says. Starbucks apparently agrees, and given that the company knows more about its employees than I do, I'm not going to question its conclusion. But then goes on to question whether or not the response is the right one. But again, it's just hard to sort all of this out.
I agree. Racism exists, not only here, but in other countries. But at least in my experience, the vast majority of Americans are aware of our past and do their best to try to mitigate or push back from that and simply try not to accept it. So you have, and among conservatives, if a African American runs for a legislative position and that person is running on a conservative platform, we embrace that person. We hope that person's able to make it. I mean, it's there's an embracing of minorities in many cases, but it's ideologically based and not necessarily. It's not a race issue.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Well, let's get another perspective here. We'll go to Clarence in Texas, KBJS. What's your point of view?
Yes, sir. Look, thank you for taking this call, and definitely appreciate the opportunity y'all affording to, discuss this issue. I'm definitely a black male, and one of the things I wanted to share is how we cannot ignore that black males, not just, using a generalization of racism or prejudice or discrimination, but we do have to pay particular attention to the fact that the black male in this nation, this country, has been targeted, sometimes intentionally, sometimes non-intentionally. And in this situation, a lot of people may say, well, they didn't intentionally do it or intentionally practice racism. But that's where we deal with now the subconscious and the systematic part. And when I see the CEO who now is talking about a national, closing of the stores, some people may say, well, he should have just dealt with that particular store, and as someone stated earlier, you either fire or deal with the supervisor at that location. But what I'm watching him do is we're not dealing with an isolated situation. We're dealing with a systematic situation. And while this might not be his intent, hopefully other CEOs and other companies will look at this as an opportunity to deal with discrimination in their workplace, not only among black males or minorities, period, but even women and others. So this one time definitely won't be enough, but hopefully, it'll prompt some ongoing type of, training and revisiting of the situation altogether. But
that could be a teaching moment, and I agree with you. I'm coming to a break, but again, it could be a moment that causes us to have some discussion. One of the reasons I posted the piece by David French is to saying this implicit association test may not be the answer, but to have a national conversation, I think we're going to have that, because those of us around the table that go to Starbucks, we're going to have to go somewhere else on May 29th, right?
I suppose so, yes.
Yeah, so interesting. You've got some great points, and I've got a lot more phone calls, but I have one of those breaks coming up here, so let me just say that anybody on the line, when we come back to the break, some of you want to speak to that issue. Of course, we've also suggested that some of you might want to address the National School Walkout, which has taken place today. And then there's an event that some in Planned Parenthood want to do on Monday. And so I see one of our callers wants to address that issue. Penna, sometimes it'd be better if we just left the schools to teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic, but that's not exactly happening anymore. Yeah,
I know. You get out of school for whatever you disagree with, you got a day off.
And all sorts of liberal agenda items are being introduced into the curriculum. So we'll take a break, and we'll take some more phone calls right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net, or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Fun Laugh Hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Of course, we have the National School Walkout today, but we also have something we're going to talk about in just a minute, a Planned Parenthood event. And then, of course, we have posted some articles related to everything from Starbucks to Mike Pompeo, Andrew McCabe, and if we have time, we'll get to this very good article by Dr. Merrill Matthews, Raise Teachers' Salaries by Draining the Public School Administrators' Swamp. Let's go to WAGP. First of all, Nicole, I think you want to talk about this event taking place in the public schools, so tell us more.
Well, I heard a little bit about it on the radio on the ride home yesterday, and it was very appalling to me, but not surprising. And I wanted to know more about it before I spread the word to a few moms in my neighborhood, because I happen to homeschool my children. But I know that their children are enrolled in public school, and it was very concerning to me. For many people that I know that have their children in the public arena, i.e. the public school, that are Christians, you know, I realize that everyone can't homeschool. And so that was very alarming to me, and I just wanted a little more information on that. So
is it the sex ed sit-out?
Yes, I believe that's what they called it.
Yes, it's Monday. And what it stems from is, you know, Planned Parenthood is in many schools, and a lot of schools use it as an educational source for sex education. And if you go to the Planned Parenthood website, you can see how graphic it can be. Often, in the name of discouraging pregnancy, they will encourage other sexual practices short of intercourse. That's one thing that's very objectionable. This is National STD Month, Sexually Transmitted Disease Month. And so they also, at Planned Parenthood, have curricula that are ostensibly to prevent sexually transmitted diseases, but they don't, I mean, there's no moral or abstinence component to it. In fact, abstinence is just what's left out. And so many of us, we see the logical connection with abstinence with not getting pregnant and not getting a sexually transmitted disease. Why can't you teach that if you're going to teach sex ed at all? It's just getting more and more graphic, and there's a new curriculum that's being pushed now across the country through the Department of Education, through the ACLU, is also part of pushing this, and Planned Parenthood. And so this one is so objectionable and graphic that a lot of parents have gotten wind of it, and so someone has organized the National Sex Ed Sit-Out to keep your kids home from school on Monday. So we're blasting the left for doing that, but the right is also doing it, those who object. And really, I think keeping your kids out is great, but the more important part of it is find out what is being taught in your school if you have your kids in public, even private school, because you can go and keep them out of that class. And then, you know, go further, object, let other people know what's being taught. You can find out on the internet. You can look at Planned Parenthood's site and see what it is. So that's what it's about. And I would say if you're a homeschooler, you know, I homeschooled my kids for part of the time, but I still got involved in what was going on in the public schools because I think those are the people that your kids are going to be raised with. They're going to be on teams with them, and they're going to be in church with them.
True.
So you're paying your tax dollars for it.
So I would say thank you for asking the question.
And Nicole, we'll try to cover a little bit more of that on Monday. But again, there is a website, sexedsitout.com. It's a long one. And then they also have the hashtag sexedsitout movement. So you can find out some of that. We'll try to talk a little bit more about it. One of the things I always have difficulty, Penna, talking about is when we get into sex education. I do sit on a board, Aim for Success, for example, where we talk about this. But you almost have to give a parental advisory. We know that we have homeschool families listen to this, and you just travel down that road for a little bit. I mean, like you said, if you want to even look at this, make sure that you don't go to the Planned Parenthood site with your kids around looking at the computer. You will just be horrified by the kinds of things that are being presented. And it's almost impossible for those of us that are Christians, that are looking at this from a biblical point of view, to even talk about in a way that's responsible.
Yeah, it's not responsible because there's this implicit assumption that young people can't control themselves and that they're going to have sex anyway. And that's not the assumption that, as believers, that we should be coming from. We should be coming from the assumption that, yes, we're all sinners, but we also, if you're a Christian, you can have the power of the Holy Spirit to enable you to walk in, just agreement with the principles of God. So that's where we teach our children. And we also teach them the pitfalls of this kind of activity. We don't teach us how to avoid pregnancy by putting it's the same Band-Aid that you were talking about on your car, the warning light. No, you don't talk about ways to not get a sexually transmitted disease but still have sex. You're probably going to end up either pregnant or getting one.
That's
so
right.
Talk about abstinence, talk about purity, talk about the self-esteem that comes from saving yourself. For marriage, talk about God's plan for intercourse within marriage. It's even a picture of Christ's relationship with the church. Those are the things that we want to teach our kids. You can't expect the public school to teach all of that, so you got to take responsibility for it.
So again, Nicole, appreciate you bringing it up. And again, that takes place on Monday, April 23rd. Of course, today is Friday, April 20th. And of course, you have the National School Walkout, so we'll get back into that. Also talking about Starbucks, so let's continue down that road, get a few more comments. Also on WAGP in South Carolina, Alicia, what's your point of view?
Well, I thank you for taking my call, but I just wanted to share, as I said before earlier with the other gentleman, as an African-American mother, I do, as I was listening to the previous caller, I do want to put out there is still such a strong, I guess, undercurrent of racism that, as I was sharing earlier, just walking into a store with my children, how sometimes activity changes. And I'm a Christian mother, never planned to steal anything or anything, just want to go into a store. There's still activity in the way. It still needs to be brought to the attention that there's still an undercurrent that people assume or activity changes, and it's not a figment of our imagination that
they start
people
watching
were
you.
doing.
Is that what you're saying? They start
things
watching
were
you
going on,
and start going down the aisles and saying, "Oh, what are you doing? Where are you
yeah,
going?"
Yeah,
that
just
kind of
conveniently being wherever we are, as opposed to when you first come in the store, that's not happening. So I think we really need to get some honesty and ownership on all parts, that there's still something that needs to be addressed, because I think some of the agitation and I guess, for lack of a better word, the passion that younger people, 20-somethings or whatever you want to call them, they're feeling it because they're achieving the same higher, education. They're getting those same degrees and everything, but that suspicion is still there. So until we really address the fact that that's still an element in American society that we must address. We have to address it honestly from a Christian standpoint, from a social standpoint. We need to address it and have that dialogue to where we understand each other, and that some of that pain that that they're feeling, because they can't understand. They're achieving the same achievements, but things are still not changing in their society and in their community. And that's pretty much what I wanted to say.
Well, again, as you have, I think, illustrated, and Clarence, when he called earlier from Texas, I think this could be a teaching moment, and I just wish it wasn't taken over by some of these protesters. If you look at the articles we've posted, these people are shouting and they're holding up their fists and things like that. that's not going to help the dialogue, because I think both Clarence and Alicia are talking about some dialogue that needs to take place, but not when people are wanting to boycott stores and pour coffee out on the streets and call for boycotts and all of the rest. So we'll see where this goes, but May 29th is going to be an interesting day. Anybody wants Starbucks coffee, going to have to go somewhere else, and they're going to be training 175,000 employees. So we'll see where that goes.
It strikes me that the response tends to polarize the debate rather than what Alicia's talking about, which is something to encourage debate.
Bringing us together. You know, the one place where I think we can bring us together, we talked about this earlier with one of our other callers, I think it was Bob, that's in the church, right? Isn't that the place where I think we can really see racial reconciliation? So we've got some great comments, and we will try to get to some of those after the break. By the way, we do have this very good article posted by Dr. Merrill Matthews, Raise Teachers' Salaries by Draining the Public School Administrators' Swamp. I did talk about it in the very first hour, which you don't hear on the national program, but you will be able to read that, and we may get into that after a few more phone calls right after these important messages.
With unemployment at a low 4.1%, businesses are complaining that they can't find enough workers. The Wall Street Journal says the shortage is due in part to government benefits that corrode a culture of work. Consider SNAP, the nation's food stamp program. More than 40 million Americans are in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. That's up from 17 million in 2000. Since then, the benefits and total cost of the program have exploded. Between 2000 and 2008, food stamp spending doubled. Due to the 2008 recession, the Obama administration allowed states to waive the work requirements that existed for SNAP participants. More than after previous recessions, food stamp recipients have stayed in the program, and SNAP spending has now nearly doubled again. SNAP benefits should be reserved for poor people, but the program has long operated under a policy of broad-based categorical eligibility. In 30 states, that means a low-income person with plenty of net worth is still eligible. A person who draws on or even receives information about government assistance can get food stamps. The Farm Bill, introduced in the House of Representatives, features a requirement that able-bodied Americans ages 18 through 59 and receiving food stamps work at least 20 hours per week. There are exemptions for the disabled and anyone who is pregnant or caring for a child under 6. About a third of current participants will be subject to the new rules. This should save taxpayers around $90 billion over the next 10 years. According to the Journal, those who stop receiving benefits because of a work requirement will fall into two categories. Either they refuse to work or train for work, or they found a job. Polls show that nearly 90% of the public agrees that able-bodied adults should be required to work or prepare for work as a requirement for receiving assistance. Our system should reflect such wisdom. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
All listeners out there, I've been listening for over 2 years. I just recently became a supporter. So I'm a proud supporter of Point of View, and so I would just encourage everyone who listens to this radio station and to your specific broadcast, because it has been so influential for me, and I refer people to it because you put out such great information, and it's so thought-invoking and conversation-stimulating. It's great. So thank you so much, and I'll continue to support you guys.
But I've decided I'm going to give Point of View something this year because I think financially we're doing better. Point of View is one of, in my opinion, 2 or 3 places where you can really get this kind of information, and it is sorely lacking in our culture. And so Point of View, and there's a couple other programs, if we don't support them, I'm not convinced those messages will get out.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention that you can actually watch this program on Facebook Live, and we've got quite a robust discussion taking place over there. We may not even have time to refer to any of the comments that are there, but I thought for just a minute, lots of times people at this particular point in the broadcast, if they're listening online, hear Penna Dexter's commentary. Well, if you heard her one for April 13th, it's on the sex ed sit-out, and that was the question Nicole was asking just a minute ago. And so some people might say, well, why didn't you tell us more about it? You did an entire commentary, Penna, on that. And so if people want to go to our website, pointofview.net, and just go to other viewpoints, go down and you'll see the sex ed sit-out, which you have the information that we just talked about a minute ago. Your commentary today is the idea of work for food. And so, again, just the idea of beginning to reevaluate some of this issue of welfare reform.
Yeah, President Trump has said that he wanted to do that. He wanted to do something about welfare reform. And I will say food stamps use blossomed under Obama, especially after the recession. But and they sort of de-emphasized and gutted the work requirements for food stamps, and they call it SNAP, the SNAP program. And so when the economy started coming back and things started improving again, they did not reinstate the work requirements. So there are so many people on food stamps that, shouldn't probably necessarily be on in the program. And that's what Congress is trying to address right now. Of course, as we mentioned during the break, Kirby, food stamps is under the agriculture bill, the farm bill. And, it's a huge part, probably much bigger than any kind of farm subsidies, is food stamps. And so Congress is discussing that right now, putting it together, and part of it will be a work requirement. There will be exceptions for people with disabilities, people with a child under 6, but you'll need to be working or involved in some kind of a training. And it really makes a lot of sense now when we're on, when we're in a time where we're basically at full employment.
Yes.
That people should be working in order to receive food stamps.
And again, it's a hand up rather than a hand out.
Right.
Really help people there. So again, some great resources and the commentary by Penna Dexter. If you would like to get that one, it will show up in your inbox tomorrow if you sign up. And if you would like to find the one that we just talked about a minute ago, that's on our website. But there's another article I do want to talk about, and Dr. Merrill Matthews, this piece that comes from the Institute for Policy Innovation, Raise Teacher Salaries by Draining the Public School Administrators' Swamp. You went back and looked at the numbers and the percentage of administrators and found something kind of interesting, didn't you?
Yes. Somebody from the Milton Friedman Institute for Educational Choice published this a few years ago, and then he did an update recently. And it's interesting because he went from 1950 to 2015 looking at the growth in administrators, non-teaching administrators versus the growth in students. And what he concluded was that the number of non-teaching administrators grew at 700%, seven times the growth of students over that same period. 700%.
Yeah.
It's a huge number, and those are not people who are teaching. They take salaries. Some of them take very big salaries. They use the pension benefits and so forth, but they don't actually get into the business of teaching. And so part of it, with the walkouts that are going on from teachers asking for raises and so forth, the point we're trying to make is we spend a lot of money on publication. It just doesn't all go to teachers. In fact, in Texas, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick points out that 32% of our public education funds in Texas go to teachers. The other, 68% goes to administration, facilities, and everything else. So it's only a third goes to teachers.
Well, again, Penna, when I looked at those numbers, and by the way, there's a graph and some charts and things like that. So I would encourage people to get a copy of that because it really helps you try to make the case for the fact that we're all for public education. It's something that we have to do in order to educate the next generation. But we seem to be spending a lot of money on what turns out to be a ballooning administrative staff.
Yeah, how many of those administrators do we really need? And it seems like sometimes, it sounded like a good idea, and once it's there and implemented, there's no way to make it leave. As we mentioned before, when there's a problem with finances in a school district, it's usually the splashy things that are floated out there that we're going to have to lose. We're going to lose the athletic program if we don't raise taxes. People are pony up right now.
And one of the things that Peace points out in Texas, the number of administrators to teachers is almost a 1-to-1 ratio, nearly 1-to-1 ratio, one administrator to one teacher.
There's something really wrong with that, right? If a teacher dies, then the administrators go into the funeral saying, my teacher died.
My teacher died. I'm going to have to double up with somebody else.
Something is seriously wrong with this. So, again, if you would like to read that, we have it, of course, on our website, pointofview.net. But another place where people can go to find some of the great articles that you and some of your staff are involved with at the Institute for Policy Innovation is ipi.org. What do we find when we land there?
IPI is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research institute, commonly called a think tank, been around for 30 years. We post articles and things that we publish in a range of different formats or that we publish ourselves. Everything's available on the website, free for people to go and consume and share as they see fit.
Well, again, some great resources that are available at IPI. And Penna, again, your commentaries are very helpful. The one today, of course, deals with welfare reform. The one we just talked about a few minutes ago with Nicole deals with this sit out, which is a little different than the national school walkout. I see some of them, people called in late and wanted to talk about the gun control walkout. We'll have to get to those on Monday, and we'll also talk a little bit more about that sit out. But all of it's available at our website, pointofview.net.
Yes, and all of your commentaries. Every day you have a commentary, and so you're so gracious to promote mine that are just come out on Saturdays. But you can listen or you can read it. It's short, and that's what I like about Dr. Matthews' pieces that he puts up at IPI too. Everything has a lot. It's sort of compact, so it's easy and quick to read. I think people like that today, and so you can find what you need by using our websites on an issue that you might want to share on your social media or just kind of be part of an argument and have your facts and figures in front of you.
Well, again, next week we will be talking about, are there alternatives to the school? Maybe we should take our kids out of the public schools. Ray Moore is going to be with us talking about that. We have John Smirek talking about some of these very important social issues. Penny Nance will be with us as well. And Matt Shaheen will be with us during the hour for our Texas listeners. So there are just a lot of things that you can hear next week on Point of View. And over the weekend, let me just encourage you to find some of these articles on everything from Starbucks to Mike Pompeo, Andrew McCabe, and teachers' salaries. It's all available at our website, and, of course, a link to ipi.org. Dr. Merrill Matthews, always great to have you in studio with us.
Thank you for having me.
We are out of time. We're not out of calls. Sorry about those that didn't get on, but, there's always next week. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.